Hey, this is Dr. Corey Glenn with Blue Sky Bio, and I'm going to show a quick technique that we use to create some reinforcement inside of a 3D printed hybrid. And as you can see here, this already has titanium bases in there. It's been in the mouth for quite a while, and the patient's going to use this as really a long-term temporary. So printed alone is usually not going to hold up. They'll typically break that. And so we made the decision to just extend the use of this by adding some reinforcement to it. And so this was sent to me by Dr. Kellum, who's the residency director down at the Foundry in Birmingham. And the resident that was working on this case just took that existing hybrid and then using a burr just hollowed out a big area on the lingual side here. And then they took an intraoral scan of that and then just sent it over to me. And so I thought through it, and this is kind of what I came up with. So I'll show you the technique, and hopefully you'll learn some cool Meshmixer tricks along the way. So the idea of what I'm going to do is select all of this inside area where the grinding away has been done. And one quick way to do that, or at least quicker way, is to go to your Edit panel and then hit the button that says Generate Face Groups. Now what Generate Face Groups does is it's looking for abrupt changes in contour, and when it finds those, it's generally going to create a new, what's known as a face group, these different colored groups like you're seeing right here. And so you can play with the sliders, but this really did a good job of capturing most of this internal surface. So I'll select that, and what this allows me to do is now go to the Select tool, and rather than having to sit here and highlight everything, I can just double click that one big pink spot, and then I just need to come back and fill in a couple of little gaps where it missed things, where the internal surface is a bit rough. Okay, as you see, we've got all of that selected, and what I'm going to do now is go ahead and smooth the boundary. So come up here to modify, and before I smooth the boundary, I'm going to use the optimize boundary. That way if there's a little triangle that's left out somewhere, it will include that. Now I'll come back and use modify and smooth boundary. And there you see the surface is all offset. Now if I want to make that be a clickable surface where it just immediately selects it all in the future, then while I've still got that selected, I could come up here to modify and create a face group, and now it's generated a single face group out of all of that internal surface that was selected. So with this done, the way we're going to create the bar for reinforcement is I'll double click this again. I'm going to come up here to Edit and then go down to Offset. And what we'll do is just offset this by a small amount. It's obviously a rough surface, so it needs a little bit of slop space to be able to slide in and out of there passively. And so looking at this, it may not quite need that much, so I'm going to bump this down to maybe 0.35. Okay, that looks good. And with that done, I can now go ahead and separate this into its own shell. So if you see what's happened here, there's the original object, and then this is still selected orange. This is actually the surface that I offset. And what I'd like to do is turn that into its own STL. So I'll do that by coming up here while it's still highlighted orange, go to Edit, and then down to Separate. So now it's separated these into independent shells that I can turn on and off independent of one another. And with that done, what I want to do now is close this in to turn it into a three-dimensional object. Now if I just close these edges across here, then it's going to be an STL with all the business surface facing inward. So I need to flip that out. So double click that all again and come up to Edit, Flip Normals. And as you see, what that's done is created that as more of an external surface. And now we can begin closing this in. I'm going to do that by using the Select tool. And you could just go in here and do a flat fill by repairing this one hole, but this is not a really uniform hole. It's going to really warp across the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is break it into smaller areas for the software to close. And I'll do that by selecting little areas, then go to Edit and Bridge. And now you see, rather than having one giant hole, now I have one big one and then this one really small one. Now the software could easily fill in that little gap. So I'm just going to repeat that process maybe 4 or 5 times across this, and I'll time lapse it for you so that you don't have to sit there and watch me do this. Okay, with that done, now we've closed this into several smaller individual boxes so that when the software now does a flat fill across this, it's not going to be trying to connect this border way over to this border. Rather, it should just be able to close this in very easily. I am going to go ahead and use the smoothing brush. So go to Sculpt, Brushes, Robust Smooth, and I just want to get rid of some of these rougher areas and just gently smooth those out. In fact, it would not be a bad idea just to do a once over across all of this boundary, just so that it closes things in a little bit more cleanly. And with that done, now go to Analysis, Inspector. It's going to highlight where there are holes in your mesh, and let's just use the Auto Repair All function. And now you have a piece that could be milled out in PEEK or whatever material of your choice, metal. Really just depends on what you have access to and what you can mill. But now that that's done, you can see what it does is creates this object that can very precisely fit in there, but that has about 0.35 millimeters of space all around it, so that you can get some cement or acrylic or whatever you want to bond this in. And the net result is that it takes your really dirt cheap printed hybrid and makes it something extremely strong. Once this is filled in with PEEK or Trilor, something of that nature, there's absolutely no way you could break this. It's possible you could chip a tooth or something, but an all-out break is going to be nearly impossible on this. So the only other thing that I would do before finishing this up is maybe just go over it and smooth it. And I could do that by maybe clicking this, but I don't want to smooth the outside. I want to smooth this internal surface that I've created. So we've selected all of that, and I'm going to go and expand the ring, and that's going to wrap it over this little edge. Expand ring just means it's going to expand the selected ring out by one triangle in every direction. And with that done, now I can hit deform and smooth, and that's going to clean that up a bit. You can play around with these things. You can do things like uniform triangles, max smoothness, and I actually kind of like how the max smoothness looks in this case, so I'll accept that. And then the one other thing you'll have to do before this is an object that could be milled out, you're going to have to make sure that there's no areas of mesh that crosses over itself. And that's actually what you're seeing right here. Okay, so to fix that, it's very simple. Let's go to Brushes, Smooth again, and I'm just going to take a quick swipe across that, and it will erode it a little bit, but that's fine. That was so thin that it was probably not going to be that useful to us anyway in that area. And while I'm at it, I'll just go over all these edges to get rid of any sharpness to them. And there you have it. So that's the final STL with no areas of mesh crossing over itself. If you wanted to bulk it up even more, you do have the ability to do that with your sculpting tools. Go to Brushes and Inflate, and you could come in and actually inflate some of this surface to bulk it up a little bit. Strength is turned down really low, but you can see if I bump that up, how much more it does that. So I'll cancel out of that. This is the final file that was sent over to Ben, and he went ahead and just milled this in Office with some PEEK. And so here you see the picture of the original hybrid that was hollowed out using just a handpiece, and then you see the piece that was milled out that's going to fit inside of that. And so again, this is just a much easier and much faster way to do this than to go back into the software, to start over fresh, to design it from the ground up with a truly proper framework to mill and PEEK, and then have to mill that all out, rebond tie bases. So this is just a quick hack that can really extend the life of your printed hybrids and just give them a lot more strength.